the article said in senior living communities. Communities. I think it was like that. And I thought that would be a perfect topic since you all live in a senior community. I like to give the history of how I got into this subject, and unfortunately a sad situation. This is senior living communities, but what I'm going to talk about is bullying with seniors, and then we'll get back to the community as well. And how this first came up for me was in 2013, and I won't mention the nursing home. I was taking care of a patient for about 10 years at a place called Mount Assisi Personal Care Home. And this particular patient had congestive heart failure, fell, and broke her hip. So she was in the hospital. Back then you could stay in the hospital for 5 or 6 days if you had a hip problem. Now you're in and out in 2 days. Can't be 3 because otherwise Medicare gets stuck. But that all being said, the patient went to a local nursing home. And like I said, I knew the patient for about 10 years. I'll call her Mary. And what happened was, when I examined patients, as those of you that are my patient knows, I check everything. And so as I'm examining this patient over the 10 years I knew her, never did she ever show any fear, never did she ever flinch. And I went to see her at the nursing home the day after she was admitted from the hospital, being in for 5 days for hip replacement after congestive heart failure. And as I went to listen to her lungs, she went like that. She put her hands up. And I didn't understand that. So I sat down and started talking a little bit more. And then I went to examine her again, and she put her hands up. And so I talked to the medical record person at that particular facility, because that's how we physicians that go to nursing homes interact. The person in medical records knows all the patients, and they know when you need to do charts. So I went to speak to this person, and I found out that this wasn't the only patient that had this problem. And what it came to be when I uncovered the information, I told you she had congestive heart failure, so she had to urinate frequently. And the night shift aide threw the bedpan at her and said, "Here, do it yourself." And that was the first, and that was in 2013, that I even thought about bullying in a nursing home. And so when I looked into it back in 2013, what I found was empty. No plan for prevention. And then, interestingly enough, in 2015, I got back into the business. At one point in my life, I owned a retirement village. Ironically, it was before this place was built. For those of you guys that know Joe Murphy, I was part of the planning here because I was building a place when this place was built. And so Joe and I would talk periodically. That all being said, when I got into the business, what I found is a lot of people that take care of seniors don't like taking care of seniors. And I didn't realize that. I had no idea. I've worked in nursing homes since 1990. I've been part of senior care since that time, probably before, and never did I realize that when I say a lot, I think the data says 40%. 40% of, we'll say, senior care employees, I don't want to use the word don't like, let's say aren't fond, are not fond of seniors. And again, I found this curious because, like I said, at that point in time, I owned a place and I was watching the interaction, and it's amazing. It's almost black and white. There's no gray. You have a group that love being around seniors, enjoy talking and indicating to me that they have a reciprocal relationship with the senior, meaning that the affection they show or the enthusiasm they show in their job comes back to them with the individual that they're taking care of. And so I looked into it further, and I found most facilities, I'll put most, try to keep the same staff, to care for residents, I'll put R for residents, in long-term care. And I think that's good, because if you develop a relationship with somebody, the more that you can care for that person, the better off it is, okay? A quick aside for this, in 2014, my son Tony, who's a physician now in South Carolina, he said to me, he said, "Dad, I want to do what you did whenever you were in between medical school." And I said, "Well, they don't make orderlies anymore. I was a house orderly at Hammond Medical Center up in Erie." And he goes, "Well, what's the equivalent?" And I said, "A nurse's aide." So I had some connections over at Vincentia Nursing Home, and he went and got certified to be a nurse's aide. And to this day, he'll tell you it's the best thing he ever did when he was pre-med going into medical school and ultimately now as a physician, because you have to learn what happens with the patient all day to understand patient care. And as a orderly, I learned that, and as a nurse's aide, he learned that. And my other son happened to be a nurse's aide, a nurse, before he went to medical school. And they feel the same way, that interaction with the residents requires both sides to get to know each other's personalities and how things go on. So why I'm bringing up the nursing home first is because when you go into communities, you start out independent, as you all are, and then you get into, I'll put AL, assisted living. That's the best term I use. And then we end up with long-term care. And if you have an illness or an injury, you might go to an inpatient rehab, a long-term acute care facility, and sometimes what we call specialty care. What is specialty care? Specialty care, the best way I would describe it is, unfortunately you had an injury and you have lung disease and you require a tracheotomy and you can't come off the trach. So you can't go to a regular long-term care facility. I better put skilled too. Skilled nursing facility. This is when you are independent assisted and you have to go into a long-term care facility temporarily before you get back into independent and assisted. And why I want everybody to learn and understand all this is because it all has to do with your ADLs. Anybody know what that means? Activity of daily living. Your future is all determined on your ADLs. So when you go into a facility, or before, let's say you're home and you want to go to an assisted living facility, the admissions director will evaluate you and find out what your activities of daily living are. Can you bathe yourself, dress yourself, feed yourself, groom yourself? Could you cook for yourself? Can you shop for yourself? Can you do your banking? Those are a general snapshot of ADLs. And if you can handle all that, then you're independent. If you're about to go into assisted living, your ability of how many of those you can do and how long you've been doing them and when the change occurred determines where you end up, whether it's assisted living, personal care home, or long-term care. Does everybody understand that concept? We'll come back to it because I talk a little bit about the bullying in all these areas. But back now to the senior living came up in the article, and it had to do with high-rise living. And the article found that this population had qualities that set them up as either the victim or the bully. And it was very interesting. I tell the story, I was going to be a pediatrician many, many years ago because the person that I trained with, I was down at John Hopkins with a guy by the name of Malchijah Spraggins. Interesting character. But the reason I didn't stay with it because all too often you befriended a 15, 16, or 17-year-old that ended up 6-8 months from now not being on the face of the earth anymore. And it was difficult for me because you develop that relationship and then something so devastating happening to a child was more than I could handle at the time I was going into it. So that all being said, what we find is that in a general population, for bullying to occur, and let's get a good definition of bullying. That's population. And we'll put CC, RC, since you're living in one, high rise, and what do they call them? I'm forgetting the term. What I'll put is community center, because that's the best word I can think of now. There's community centers, because I lecture at a lot of them, and these are based on geographic areas, generally townships or boroughs. So I lecture in McCandless, I lecture at the high rise in Bellevue, and generally the people from that community reside in those high rises, okay? And what we end up with is this population I've been taking care of for probably greater than 25 years. And I didn't look, so I can't say that it wasn't obvious, but I just assumed that everybody gets along. I didn't realize there could be potential problems. And then when I did the first bullying lecture, I realized there was a major problem. And so I've been paying attention to it when I go to places, and it's so amazing. It reminds me of high school, you know, and some of the articles are related to that you get the little cliques in the different groups, and these people can be real persistent at being, let's say, a PIA to you. And they have an audience, usually they're friends, and they make this worse. And believe it or not, people don't believe it because now I'm so fat, but believe it or not, I wrestled 98 pounds when I was in high school, and I graduated from Kiski at 106 pounds. And I was bullied. You know, there was no doubt that I was picked on, but I was intelligent. And so I made friends with the biggest guys in the school. And so it wasn't long after I got picked on that the person that picked on me got their ass kicked by my friend. And so you have to have that ability to maneuver as the victim of a bully, or you avoid people. And I used to do that a lot of times. You know, you'd be walking down the hall and you saw someone that was gonna pick on you, so you went down 2 floors and ran around, and then you were late for class, and the teacher's giving you grief because you're late for class, but you're afraid to say anything about the bully because the bully's gonna beat you up again. You know, so that vicious circle exists, and that's why I relate it to high school, especially mostly with the high rise has been my experience. But even in a population like yourself and in these community centers, what do we find? The 4 things they talk about are verbal abuse, physical abuse, gossip, and now they're talking cyber, which if those of you that are on computer every day, I applaud you. I still like my flip-top phone. You know, this is my speed. But when you look at these, we'll take cyber out for a moment, just go through these. What I found at the one high-rise that I was at, I think there was 118, if I remember. And I'll bet we had 90 people jammed into that little conference room. And what you found was there were groups that would sit outside, and when the van would pull up to let you off, as you were carrying your groceries in, they were actually physically touching your groceries and looking to see if there was something that they would just take out. And again, this is in a nice area. This is in McCandless. And it hit me that, wow, it is like high school again. I mean, there are certain people that have these personalities. So we'll turn right back to this page, but what I want to do is victim, bully. Let's say CP, corporal punishment. I was just talking Monday to a patient of mine, and we were talking about how we were disciplined. Actually, we were talking about our parents smoked, and we talked about the fact that the whole car would be full of smoke. You couldn't even see their heads. It was all white. And you'd crack the window, and you'd get yelled at. Matthew, shut that window, it's cold in here. And it's like, I can't breathe, you know, like all this smoke. But the whole point was that we lived through a different era. And I was telling him the story that my next door neighbor, Johnny, he was my friend, his father was cutting his grass. And his father told Johnny that they were gonna go swimming. But his father said he had to cut the grass. And I watched Johnny be a PIA to his father while his father was cutting the grass. He shut off the mower, grabbed his kid by the hand, pulled his pants down, and beat him with a strap. That was legal back then, okay? But guess what? Johnny beat his kids. I got beat. I beat my children until my wife works nights. And believe it or not, she hired I'm not allowed to say mentally retarded anymore. So I think you have to say cognitively challenged. So she hired a cognitively challenged lady to babysit my children. So I come home on a Thursday. I work late on Thursdays. I was tired. Last thing I wanted to hear, you ever hear people cry and then they can't get the breath? Like, you know, they can't catch it. So she was crying like that, telling me about how bad my boys were. They were spitting on the wall, peeing on the floor, all this kind of stuff. So she leaves, I go upstairs, and I have a fan, and the kids were in bunk beds. So I grabbed two of them by the scruff of their necks, and I put Matt's head in the blade, and I told Mike I was gonna put his head in. And then I threw Mike against the wall, and when he came down on the thing, I smacked his butt. Well, he was still in diapers, it exploded. So the next morning, my wife comes home at 8. I'm upstairs shaving. And she comes in and she says, what the heck happened last night? I go, nothing, why? She said, Matt's downstairs calling CYS. So I get downstairs to see what's going on. And sure enough, he's looking into blue pages for children's youth services. So I say to Tony, I said, so Tony, you guys gonna go to an orphanage, huh? And I hear Matt say yes. So he goes, yes. So as I'm walking away, Matt says to Tony, what's an orphanage? And Matt says, it's a resort. And what I realized was right then, when he was making calls, I wish I would have had the guts to do that when I was young. You know, because we were afraid of my father. That's how I was raised. That's how my father was raised. And the reason I'm bringing it up is that's the personality trait that they find with bullies. They're a product of bullies. And they really don't want to be bullies. And they actually want to be caught. And they want to be talked to. But no one realizes that. You're either afraid of them or you don't want to say anything, but I'm bringing it up because I'm a product of it. And since then, I don't beat them anymore. My daughters, I used to put my hand on their backside and then slap my hand, so it sounded mean, and that was enough for them. But I really did, after that episode, just changed, and it wasn't hard. But prior to that, that's how my father was raised, that's how I was raised, and I don't know, probably for a couple years. Well, it's funny, another funny story. My wife's a pediatrician, and she reads Dr. Spock. So I come home one day, and there's these wee little chairs, and one has a big mouth, and one has a big ear. And I go, what's that? And she goes, Dr. Spock says, one sits and listens, and the other one talks. I go, what the hell are you talking about? And she goes, that's how I'm gonna, keep order with the boys. And I go, I don't know who this Dr. Spock is, but I don't believe that, right? Well, it lasted about a month, and then all of a sudden I hear, come here, you little bleepity bleep, and a smack. And that did the trick. But again, neither my wife and I, beat our children anymore from way back when that occurred. But the reason I bring that all up, this is what they talk about, that they were raised in a corporal punishment mode. My father, by the way, was a sergeant in the Army. And that was another reason. His favorite line was, talk is cheap. You have to feel. And so again, that's how we were raised. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what passes on to the bully. The trait of the victim is passive. And I think that may run in families. So you may have a sibling, a cousin, a niece, a nephew that's passive. What does that mean? I have a sister and I have a daughter that are what I would classify as passive. Nothing affects them. There could be an earthquake and they're calm. You can't upset them. They just go with the flow. That's the way they are. But they have a breaking point. And I've seen it with both. I've seen it with my sister, and I've seen it with my daughter. My sister went out on a date, a prom, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and the kid she took out on a prom, the door rang. I go to open up the doorbell. His tuxedo was ripped, his shirt was ripped, he had a black eye and a scratch over his head. And I go, what the hell happened to you? He said, your sister beat me up. I just wanted to let you know the only reason I touched her was to try to get her off me. And my daughter, Candy, she broke my son Matt's nose. Like, they were fighting, she was taking it, and here she just hauled off and punched him. And so, even a passive person has aggressiveness in them. So I put A for aggressive is a trait for both. This one has to get pushed very, 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 very much before they show any aggression. This one grew up with it. And again, right, wrong, or indifferent, this is what the psychologist and the psychiatrist say between the victim and the bully. And ultimately, the majority are on the sidelines. And this is what they call the audience. What does that mean? The bully is not going to do anything to the victim if he doesn't or she doesn't have an audience. So if there's nobody around, generally it doesn't happen. Or if it does, it's short-lived. It requires the audience for the bully to maintain his, call it bulliness, if you will. Okay, so I gave you a snapshot. Now I want to go through some of the particulars because of the seriousness of it. They say 30% of community centers, have bullying. That's a big number, guys. 30%. And they say the biggest culprit is gossip and intimidation. And And like I said, I was bullied when I was younger. What you do is you avoid the bully. At all costs, you avoid the bully, and you go out of your way to know where the bully is all the time. So you spend a lot of your time and energy trying to figure out how to stay away from the bully. And reason that I bring up the gossip and the intimidation is that's how they get their audience. You know, they may not have anything that they care about with you, but they have an interaction with you, and somehow in that interaction, based on past experiences, whatever's in their mind, they get the idea that they could bully you. And then the bullying usually starts in the way of gossip and intimidating. And what will happen is they'll start a story that's not true, but they perpetuate it with their audience. And then once it's said enough in front of the audience, they'll say it. What happens? Remember, we had the bully and the victim, B and the V. What happens? The victim is too passive to try to push back and state that the gossip's not true or to fight off any of the intimidation. And so it persists. And what occurs then is you end up with what they call cliques, where one group is over here, one group is over here. And unfortunately, it's what it is, guys. That's why I said it reminded me of high school. In the process, unfortunately, victim, can't spell it. Okay, we already talked about the passiveness. What happens to the victim? They feel the hurt 24/7. And this was news to me. I didn't realize that because I was bullied. You know, for me, once I got in a different environment, I was okay. But while I was in the environment, which is, for me, it was high school. You know, when I was in grade school, wasn't too bad. But by the time I got to high school, I didn't grow. And so I was the shortest, the little, all those different things that apply. And you end up in situations where you don't push back because you feel that you can't beat what's happening. And again, for me, what it took was just a unique set of circumstances where the person that became, to this day, he is my best friend. His mother died, and my father was the physical therapist. And after his mother passed away, the father, who's a produce person, used to bring my father a fruit basket, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and my father's birthday. And so I got to meet the sons when he would bring over the fruit basket. You know, and long story short, they went to a place called Kiski Prep. So I ended up going to Kiski, and it was remarkable because you think that going to a private prep school that bullying wouldn't be there. It was worse. But he was the biggest guy in school. And it worked out that I was just blessed to have that opportunity that here I am, the smallest guy in the school again, getting picked on within the first week or two of class. And this person who would just come over to my house with his father to drop off a fruit basket felt that that was wrong. And the reason I bring it up is that's the first step to stopping it. The audience needs to speak up. And what happens? Community centers, just my bookie. Community centers, less than 2%. Remember, it was 30%, there's a problem. Less than 2% speak up. Why? They're afraid of the bully. And they're afraid because the bully always knows everybody. So they know all the workers, they know everybody that's in the facility. So if somebody speaks up, they're afraid that the bully's gonna find out it was them. And then it gets worse. Okay, so the data is amazing. The audience doesn't speak up. The victim doesn't say anything. And it could be 24/7s that they're feeling the hurt. So what happened? Staff. You have to get to the staff. Well, in a CCRC like you're living in, you're independent. So you don't interact with the staff as regularly as a community center, assisted living, personal care, or long-term care. But you still interact with the staff. And what has to happen is the staff has to have ways to communicate. I call it the audience, just because that's how they break it down. How do you communicate with the audience? There's always ways to do it. What we used to do, I used to lecture at the high schools, and what we used to do was a suggestion box. And I'll never forget the first one. We had a girl whose mother had breast cancer, and she was taking Percocet. And the audience said the mother was a drug addict because she's on opiates. And it just blew this poor girl away. And that was the first suggestion box we had. And the way we worked it is, we got to use the auditorium, we got to invite the whole class in, and we got to have a panel of people who had the unfortunate experience of having a loved one, friend, family, or whatever, that were on medications because of cancers or other disease processes. And I have to say, it went over very, very well. Why? It educated the audience. The bully didn't have the audience anymore. When the bully now said, oh, her mother's on opiates, now the audience knew because she had breast cancer. And that's how you do it. And it has to be staff, because audience is too fearful. And again, the suggestion box is the best approach that I've seen anywhere. Other things that can occur is, we call them, there's a conference. You can connect and get video conferencing, that you can do it that way. But I find people aren't as interested as someone locally that interacts with them. So what you do is, it's called a focus group. And you invite the audience to come to the focus group, and you facilitate the discussion, and you put, as we do monthly, what you're going to talk about. And so how you set it up is, you set up the date that you're going to have the discussion regarding bullying. And you invite everybody into the room, and you have to bring an expert in. And that expert just gives data. That's all they do. They spew data. And that data enables the audience to learn what they don't know. Because again, like I told you, I've been doing this since 1990. I had no idea there was bullying at all in these community centers. And I find out 30% of these places have it. I had no idea there was bullying by the staff at nursing homes. And it happens. And so again, what I did, as I looked at this and I looked in, what does the staff do? Survey. And generally, the surveys don't start out with a bullying type survey. It starts out with something bland, where they get your opinion on the food or the furniture, like something that they'll put out just to see how many returns they get. So most of these places are over 100 people. I didn't realize there were that many, but there are. So most facilities have over 100 people. They feel good if they get over 25% response. So they will send out a survey. And again, it will have nothing to do with bullying at first. This is when it's identified that there's a problem. So they start with the surveys, and they usually put it in your mailbox because everybody goes down to get their mail. And then they hope they have something catchy on there that will at least have you do something more than crumble it up and throw it away. and they hope to get 25% of people responding. And then if they do that, then they push in some of the traits of the bully. You know, like, do you find that there is intimidation, or do you find that someone's gossiping about you? Whatever it happens to be. That's how they work through staff at facilities to try to identify the bully and ultimately educate the audience. Because remember, guys, if there's no audience for the bully, he has nothing to do. Because he's really they usually pick on the weakest person. You know, the bully doesn't take on the strongest guy in the school. The bully takes on the weakest guy in the school. And then they put out the gossip, they do the intimidation, and all those things happen. Next thing you know, there's an audience. Because whatever they put the gossip, remember the gossip is usually not true. So the gossip may be, I don't know, Mary's mother was in jail, whatever. And whatever it happens to be, the audience, after the bully brings it up, they're right there to reinforce it. And that's how you end up with the victim stuck in a situation that 24/7s, they're thinking about it. And remember, guys, I told you, I was bullied. You wake up every day wondering about that person, every single day. You worry about on the bus, because that's usually on the bus it could start. This was high school stuff, but you worry about it. It's on your mind. And that's why there needs to be something done. CCRCs. Actually, I could probably go back to that page. Oh, he gave you enough paper. We don't have to worry. Good. All right, so with the CCRCs, as you guys know, you have independent, assisted living, you have long-term care, you have skilled nursing units. And you have services such as PT, OT, other. The data in the CCRCs, it was less than 15% bullying. I'm not sure why. Whatever the reason is, 15 is still a significant number. So let's say 10 to 12% bullying. So that means that you right now sitting in here know of bullying things. Someone in here knows of people that are being bullied if you go by the data. What happens? It's the same thing. Staff. What does that mean? That means that if you see something, all you have to do when they say bring it to the attention to the staff, what does that mean? Do you have to go up in front of the staff, pull them away from where they are so people recognize that you have taken the staff member away and you're telling them something? That's not the way you want to do it. That's where the gossip starts. What you want to do, hand them a note or ask if you can find 10 minutes to talk. And you just bring up whatever you may or may not see. And again, from what I've seen through the process, and I'll go over a little bit more of that before we're done, you should not be afraid ever because of somebody else. You know, you're allowed to be afraid for a disease you may have or a loved one or whatever, but you should not have to face and be confronted with bullying at all. And so what you have to look at is, what are the ways that we can at least help the victim? And the best way, remember, educate the audience. And remember, there's some people that don't mind being the butt of the joke, okay? What was the name? Lauren Hardy, you know, some of these comedians, someone always has to take the fall. You know, I always joked around. I coached my kids for 15 years. And my assistant coach, his name's Larry Polk. And I always, at the end of the year, you have to give out awards and different things. So I always made fun of Larry. Like that was just part of what we did. And everybody knew I loved the guy. He was a great guy, but I was always able to just, you know, throw it out there joking around with him. And so you have to know, is the person really being bullied or not? But if you definitely feel there is something going on, then all you want to do is pass it along to a staff member in a way that all you're doing is saying, could this be? What does that mean? That means that what you observed, you felt that the person was a victim of bullying, okay? Or you don't even have to go that far. Let's just say the person you're telling is Joe. So it's like, hey Joe, do me a favor. I was with Mary yesterday and someone came up and she seemed to be very intimidated. Could you just do me a favor and check it out? You know, because again, what I can tell you is, like I said, I've owned them. You have people in your facility that pay attention to every detail. People in your facility that have specific jobs that they have to do. And then people in the facility that have responsibility, and based upon things that happen through the day, they react. These people here report to the owners or the people in charge regularly. I mean, I'm talking hourly if necessary. Back when there was COVID, probably every 15 minutes. It's up to the situation and circumstance as to how frequently they talk. And all we're talking about is plant the seed of, could this be? There's no harm in a discussion. And whoever that person happens to be that's in control, which could be a receptionist, could be the person that cleans, could be a person that you see walking around just keeping track of everything. Just bring it to their attention. And that, to me, is the best thing you can do to help the victim, is to just communicate with, and when I say authority, doesn't have to be security, doesn't have to be anybody, you know, quote unquote, at the top. All you want to do is share what you observed. And the reason I say that that's important to do is because, like I said, I did not realize it was a 24/7 until I thought about the big picture. And remembering when I was younger and I would avoid the bully at all costs. And you literally wake up, what's today? It's Thursday. All right, what do I have first class? What do I have? Because this person used to find me in the hallway. I mean, it was incredible. But once again, it stopped as you, for me, like I said, I connected with the guy that was bigger and stronger than anybody, which was helpful. But you also find that if the person doesn't have an audience, it goes away. You have to get rid of the audience. And the audience is just innocent bystanders in this person that's intimidating or coercing or somehow using his strength and power over the person that's the victim. All you have to do is walk away. And yet, most people were just, I guess, television, radio, whatever promoted our minds to think of that stuff. They talk about, they're upset with hockey now that there aren't enough fights. You know, it's like, it's craziness, the things that people want to watch. And so why we still are audiences to this bullying, data's out there, psychiatry just says it's easier to do nothing than it is to do something for the audience. But once again, guys, it's the first step towards helping the victim. And the education for the audience, how that works is, and I'm sure it's here, guys. So in the CCRC, you make somebody aware of your concern. And what I find, and I'd be very shocked if it didn't happen here, once you make someone aware, there's going to be education. And within that education is a 1-800 number, which really helps the victim, but it also can get to the bottom of your situation. This is an independent facility, but I've seen places, most of the community centers are run nonprofit through the communities that they're out of, and they do have these resources. So if you are being bullied, or you see somebody getting bullied, it's a 1-800 number. And I've actually seen the people come in. You know, they make inspections. You know, they'll have all their stuff on, they're from the state. They walk in, 100 people in the building, they may only talk to 5. And it might be random how they talk to the 5. But the bully sees somebody's in the building. The bully sees something's going on. And that's the first step in changing the culture and educating the audience. Because that person then, when they come in, and I've seen them at, at least 4 or 5 of the places where there was pretty bad bullying. And then again, the other part that I saw as the lecturer, you know, like people come in and out of the rooms when you're talking. You know, but what would happen is, like, let's say the bus just dropped off 10 of them. And as they walked into the facility, they were loud, boisterous, to the point where, you know, people would say they couldn't hear me. You know, that's the group bullying that they talk about. But for our purposes, what I wanted to make sure we did was make everybody aware, make sure that everybody realizes there are 1-800 numbers for both victim and audience. I'm sure they're here. I'll have to talk to Karen to find out. I didn't do that ahead of time. And then the other part of that is the education of the audience. I think I told you when I went to the one high rise, there were greater than 90 people. That same place, when they had the speaker come and talk, standing room only, I bet there were 120 people there. And everybody just wanted to hear what was being said about bullying in community centers. And again, guys, this was before 2015. And what they've seen locally, there's been an improvement. Because I still go to about 5 of them, like I told you. All right, now the piece, I'll do it this way. This one. Staff. I'm still in situations in my office. Actually, keep your fingers crossed. I'm interviewing 2 people tonight in their 30s. I hope this works out. But staff is difficult to come by. And I hope I don't have anybody in my office that really doesn't like being in my office. But what they found with the surveys that they did with certified nursing assistants, they find in their surveys that the patients bully them. That's like some of the surveys that you read, some of the data that's out there. So like, let's say they see 10 patients that day, and the first 9, they're appreciated. Oh, how was your night? How you doing? Things like that. The number 10 one would be, you know, where the hell have you been? I've been waiting for you for 10 minutes. And the whole back and forth becomes something that bothers the nurse's aide. Again, now this is just the surveys, guys. This isn't quote unquote psychology stuff. But that's the kind of stuff you're seeing. And then with staff, what they found is a lot of these senior care places, let's just say for the sake of argument, the patient was getting $10 an hour. They now see people coming in up to $20 an hour and getting a bonus to come in because they're so short of staff. So the person that's been there for 20 years and providing all that service at that facility that's only making the 10 sees somebody else come in at the 20. So I think the timing of everything and how it hit skewed some of that data, because when you looked at that back in like 2020 or 2010, it was less than 12%. So I really do believe a lot of it just had to do with the times that we're seeing that they are not fond of the patients. And I would think to myself, like, what do you mean not fond? And then I did pay attention a couple times. Some patients are demanding, some patients are loud, some patients are just, let's just say, scared of the situation they're in. And so once again, what do you have to do? The education piece. And remember, guys, surveys or wouldn't do it. So if you ever get the survey, fill it out. So the education with the survey that ends up, what you do is you do group discussions. And then you have, like, you try to do a whole day, and then what you try to do is, as you do your lectures and have a lunch and have a little discussion, you do work studies. What does that mean? That means that, A, it's costly because you have to get outside help to cover. But then you deal with your staff, and in the morning, you do a topic of discussion. And then the work study in the afternoon, or workshops as they call them. I've been involved with some of them. They're pretty amazing. You know, what you do is you get a group, say you put 5, 6 people at a table, and depending on how big your facility is, maybe you have 8 or 10 tables. And then everybody at the table picks somebody that's going to be their representative, and then you go through topics that you want to discuss. And it's amazing. It works so well because you're getting all groups to interact together and come up with an answer. And that's what you find that you're missing. That everybody's so busy, there's no interaction anymore, and there's not the communication that we once had in healthcare. And so that's how they bring it back, is they do these surveys, they get the data that they want, and then they put a plan together. The one that I was involved with, I was a medical director at a nursing home at the time, and we were invited to go, I think it was in Chicago. And it turns out there were like 4 nursing homes from Pittsburgh. And I had actually worked at 2 of the other ones before. And you brought the administrator, the physician, you brought the director of nursing, and you brought the supervisors in OT, PT, the speech therapy, all those things. And then you went over specific cases. And they would say, Mrs. Jones came, pharmacy too, Mrs. Jones came into the hospital, she had just had her hip fractured, she was placed on medication, and she became agitated. What was the problem with this case? And then you get like 20 minutes to discuss it, and then the spokesperson at each of the tables would talk about who was at fault. And I remember I was the first one to talk. And I said, who was at fault? And I said, we discussed it. We all were. And that was the right answer. You know, you can't pinpoint and pick out just one particular person. We're all at the facility. We're all responsible for what happens at the facility. But my whole point to this is, that's how when you get group discussions and you get an educator, like you have to have someone that comes in the morning that's educated with bullying and has experience with bullying to come and speak to everybody. And then you have your work study and it's all planned out ahead of time. You want to find out before the day is out, is there bullying at the facility? And if there is, what are the things that occur that it becomes a problem? And generally, it works. I mean, when I read all the data, the surveys that were done, and the one that I took part in, you get to the bottom of what the situation is. And a lot of times with the staff, that's not my job. That's not my job. And you have to turn that around to, you're the first person seeing the patient. Remember I talked about the nurse's aides. The nurse's aides know the patients. A lot of times, sure, the nurse that's on charge will tell you about it, but if I'm looking to see what happened with Mary last night, I go see the aide, because they're the ones that physically see the patient the most. So again, they're part of that whole network and team to communicate to the audience. Okay, now what I want to leave you with, bullying with seniors. It's a problem. Why? No one should be bullied. And especially as I told you about Mary, you should never be afraid. And when she brought her hands up as she did, and then when I got to the bottom of the story, the aide gets paid to provide the service. The patient was on Lasix for the CHF and had to go frequently. And you should never throw anything. And that's what got my interest in it, that has had me follow it for as long as I'm following it. And the fact, I'm still seeing numbers go up. They're not going down. And again, remember guys, if the bully doesn't have an audience, they don't exist. So say something to somebody if you see something you know, suspect even, you know, and again, you're not, this isn't some police thing, you know, you're not gonna get the person arrested. All you're doing is bringing the attention to somebody on the staff of what you witnessed, what you saw, or what you thought. And I believe that that's all you have to do if you ever see anything to enable the good guys to get to the bottom of the situation. And again, if you get a survey, please fill it out, because I've been part of those surveys, and they're real. And they are the ways in which places like this can get to the bottom of situations. And I'm not suggesting you need to at all. I saw no bullying here, but I'm just saying that CCRCs are listed in the data. It exists everywhere. And what happens once again is the bully feels stronger in many respects. Of course, they pick on the passive person, but the fact that they feel stronger, that intimidation that occurs, the verbal back and forth, the gossiping that occurs, it's just things that get to the bottom of you or get to you in such a way that it's on your mind all the time. Okay? Now, in terms of what if you're a bully? We talked about the victim. What if you're a bully? I always find, if you guys ever watch the commercials, like FanDuel and all these ones for gambling, I like how at the very end they say it so fast I can't speak that fast. But it's kind of like, if you have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER. You know what I mean? So they know that there's potentially a problem. That's what I'm looking at. What can we do for the bullies? Because remember what I told you. They're a product of being bullied. And I think I told you, my son Matt was always in charge of the other 5. And my children would complain about what he did. From my end of it, everything was okay, nothing got broken, they didn't hurt themselves, so I was okay with it. And then when you get older and the stories come out at dinner time, he was a bad bully. He picked on them all. And that was my fault, because I would just say, like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want anything to happen. Just make sure nothing happens and everything will be okay. So a lot of times we don't know how these bullies get into this situation, but at least pay attention to the fact that most of them are products of being bullied. A lot of them are products of physical abuse. And a lot of them want help. I remember telling a story, had to be at least 10 years ago. And it was at a picnic. I forget, my daughter got married. We had a picnic when she came back to Pittsburgh. And I was telling stories about how physical and mean my father was. And everybody was like, oh, your father, he's a saint. And it's like, no, he's not. But you couldn't change what anybody thought about him, because that's what they thought about him. And once again, he was physical, and it was one of those things that he used to always say, that he intimidated us to keep us out of trouble. Because as you get older, you ask, like, hey man, what you beat us for all the time, And that's what he would say, like, he kept that intimidation factor, because my mother worked and he worked, and he was afraid of us being home alone. So he had these intimidating factors out there, so you knew not to step out of line, because you'd have to pay for it. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it worked for him. But where we are today, I'm bringing it up, is they're asking for help. So, not that I want to give any kudos or anything positive per se to the bully, but a lot of times, guys, they're products. They either went through physical abuse or some other type of bullying, potentially even in the family, and they need help sometimes. So please, like I said, the reason I brought it all up is the patient I had, I call her Mary, and she was the nicest lady in the world. Never hurt a fly, and just the way she put her hands up that day. And then again, I played like investigator to try to get to it, because the aides wouldn't say anything about each other, the nurses wouldn't say anything about each other. So I went to Dee Dee, who ran the medical records. And when I started asking some questions, she knew exactly who I was talking about. Night shift, that's just it. She's on night shift, she's lazy. You know, but once again, guys, staff is hard to come by. Does that mean you accept somebody that's bullying? Heck no. But it still is what it is. It's prevalent, it happens everywhere. So again, I leave you with this. Man, they're after me today. Good thing baseball season's coming. I don't bet baseball. The most important thing with bullying is communication. And there are people out there that can speak to the bully. So again, most of the data that I read, the bully has problems. They might be psychological, they call them social. The problems are they are unsocial, and that's usually where it comes from. And it usually happens that it's passed along somehow, you know, in their environment that they grew up with. So recognize that the communication piece is the most important. The audience is what keeps the bully bullying. If they don't have an audience, it'll just fade away. And the education piece through what they call these group sessions and workshops works. So if you see anything, just pass it along. Hopefully you don't have anything here you have to worry about, or if you do, pass it along and they'll nip it in the bud right away. Okay, everybody got it? Any questions, guys? Good, you guys must not have any bullying. That's good to know. We'd like to see that. Good, thanks for having me, guys.